So he's probably going to ask some help or grab a book to help him with it. So he found some sort of solution. So actually, I hope we have a better way to, to solve our problems. So actually, what do we know that we want to take with us? So I think everybody here develops with Mvvm? Yeah, right? Okay, so Mvvm is probably everybody who uses XAML uses Mvvm. It simply goes together. Mvvm was so intended in WPF, and HTML and JavaScript don't have not M, not V, and not VM, definitely. So we definitely want to find how we can take it with us. And we like object-oriented. Yeah, we do. That's what we do. That's how we think. It's actually when somebody asks for me to implement a requirement, that the first thing that occurs to me is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to use dependency properties. I'm going to use a behavior and touch property. I want to do an abstract class and override it in a couple of shapes and forms. And this is the way we think. And we want to take this kind of how we think into HTML and JavaScript. So let's talk about what are the main differences. So we need to start and learn how it's done and what are the differences are. So when you are working in WPF, you don't use much libraries. You have your WPF, you have C#, and you probably have some third parties. You want third-party controls or something like this, but you don't have much of libraries. JavaScript is all about libraries. You can't count the amount of libraries out there. There is library for everything, and everything that, you're talking about Mvvm, or how it's called in JavaScript, it's usually called MVC. You have a lot of kind of how to implement MVC or Mvvm. So everything you need to do, you need to first know your libraries and choose how to work with them. So in this talk, we are going to talk about how to choose the right library for us as ones coming from .NET. The second thing, many IDEs. I'm guessing all of you using Visual Studio, right? Yeah, that's what we have. You can't take a notepad and write your code and then compile it manually, but why would you do that? But when you're going to web, you have a lot of IDEs. Actually, many people does use the Notepad++ to write their JavaScript code. So any IDE, any text editor actually can be your IDE. And everything is open source. JavaScript is a text, so you can't make it not an open source. And you have this kind of thing that the community supports things that we are not familiar with. We are not familiar with the idea that something is just out there supported by everyone, because we have Microsoft. We had Microsoft that supported everything that we wanted. And we say we don't have Mvvm, and we definitely don't have object-oriented. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to choose a framework. By saying framework, I mean framework that implements Mvvm. Some kind of Mvvm. Actually, most of them call it MVC. That guy is doing better than me. So most of those are actually MVC. Do you have any guess what kind of framework we are going to use? Angular. Okay, so everybody's saying Angular. Actually, there are two options. It's Angular and Knockout. But unfortunately, we are going to use Knockout. So the reason we are using Knockout is not that it's better than the other. It's simply the man who implemented Knockout is actual and Microsoft worker, which was part of the development team of WPF. When he implemented Mvvm in Knockout, he was thinking as he was thinking in WPF. That means whatever you are thinking about the data binding of WPF, you will find it here too. And that's what is so convenient for us, because you know, when you want to notify a change, you're going to implement unnotify property change. So you're going to find something very similar here. So this is why I like Knockout. Every other framework out there, they are just as good. Simply, they are more different from WPF. So this is why you're choosing Knockout. The next thing we are going to choose is an IDE. Those are a bunch of IDEs out there that you can use. Today we are going to use, what do you think we're going to use? Okay, so yet again we have a surprise. We are going to use Webstorm. The reason I want you to see Webstorm, you're all familiar with Visual Studio. Actually, Webstorm integrated better to use for web, and it's so easy to use it. So just wanted to see that, you know, let's face it, every IDE has this project on the right side, editor in the main, and at the bottom some notifications. So it's about the same, and we are going to see it. So technology-wise, what we are going to see. So the first thing we wanted to do, we want to take JavaScript and make it compile. We want to have object-oriented. We're not going to give up on the idea of inheritance and interfaces. Those are good concepts that we want to preserve, and we are going to get it. And we're also going to take our JavaScript file to get compiled. And this is a very important thing for me, because when I first started working in web, I started working in a company that were 3 teams. Each team was about 5 or 6 people working on the same code. And at the very first time that I needed to merge something, it was complete chaos. Because when you merge something in .NET, you just try to compile it, you know, if it's even compiling. But JavaScript, when you merge file, you are going home and just hope it to be fine. You need to start running it. You need to maybe start doing unit tests. So actually, we're going to see today how TypeScript help us fix it. So TypeScript is a product of Microsoft. Did you hear about TypeScript? Did you hear about Angular and TypeScript? No? So Angular actually adopted TypeScript. And the very interesting thing is TypeScript is a product of Microsoft. So Google actually adopted TypeScript. So they are actually using a product of Microsoft, which is a new thing in our industry. It's a nice thing to hear about. So TypeScript actually compiles our code. When you are writing in TypeScript, it's something very, very similar to JavaScript. And it's taking the TypeScript and converting it into JavaScript. So it's pure JavaScript at the end. And you have no concern about whether it's compatible with browser or something like this, because it is JavaScript, but it gets converted. It gets actually compiled. And this compiling phase gives us a lot of things. It gives us compile time errors. You can see here I took an employee object, it is an actual class, and I call to validate method once I misspelled it. So I can actually see that the compiler is saying, this is not valid, you cannot run this. So if I am merging this code, I would immediately see that I did some sort of wrong merge. And this is very important for us. And the next thing is IntelliSense, so that I can see what method they are, what property can I access, what parameters should I send to this method, what do I expect to get, and how many of you just use JavaScript for a while? Yeah, so if you use an API and you call a certain method, so how do you know which object you are getting? Yeah, we are just scratching, we are running it maybe to see, to put a breakpoint and see what we got. Maybe the documentation is good, maybe it's not. So we want an actual type that we know this type, what it is and what it can do. So we are getting type validation and IntelliSense. So how it actually works. We're actually going to take a TypeScript file. We're going to write it. We're going to see today, of course, the syntax of it, what it can and can't do, and taking it and compiling it into JavaScript file. It's very important to say that TypeScript, you can write both TypeScript and JavaScript. Because TypeScript is converted to JavaScript, you can write just simple JavaScript and it will work. The reason is that it is important, no one expecting you to go back home, to throw all your JavaScript code and just start writing in TypeScript. If you will adopt TypeScript, you will find yourself having both TypeScript and JavaScript in your project. And that's fine because TypeScript is converted into JS. Okay? So let's see how this TypeScript really looks like. So this is Webstorm. Nice to meet you, Webstorm. And we're going to create a new project. And it's going to be, let's say, TypeScript. So we're actually creating a blank new project so that you can see how from scratch we are starting to use TypeScript. So you can see back there? Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to npm. npm is a place with all the libraries you want to actually download to my project. And I'm going to say that I want to use TypeScript. And if the internet works, hopefully it works, we are going to download it. And it has been downloaded. And you can see here that we have TypeScript. And TypeScript has many files and everything you need, but it has this TSC, which is the TypeScript compiler. If you are just, I don't know, bored back home in the train, you can read it and try to understand. But this is actually what takes TypeScript and convert it into JavaScript. So let's create a TypeScript file. I'm going to call it data objects. And we are calling it TS for TypeScript. And when we create it, this is actually Webstorm telling me, okay, listen, there is something that I need to do with this TypeScript. Because this is a kind of file that I need to work on. I need to take the compiler and give him this file, and the output is going to be JavaScript. This is called a watcher. So simply add watcher, okay, and that's give me the ability to actually create the JavaScript. So what I'm going to do now, first of all, I'm going to write some method which is pure JavaScript. So this is going to be a function that, let's say, return true. So this is a very simple code, and it's actually going to be transformed into exactly the same thing. Okay, this is JavaScript converted into JavaScript. Nothing new there, but let's see how we can make it TypeScript. So what do you have in the very first of the beginning of C# file, except of using? Yeah, namespace. We have a namespace. So it's not a namespace, it's a module, but it's actually exactly the same. So I'm writing this code in the namespace of an app, and we want to create a class. So I want to create a public class, so it's going to be an export class, and let's call it test. So here I have a class, and this is an actual class. So it can have everything you imagine in a class. It can have a constructor and properties and members and method. And let's say I'm going to create here some kind of a method. So let's do a method called login. So let's say login needs to have this username. And this is the interesting point, because I can say it is a string. And that's new, because I can now say it is actually going to accept string and string only. And I wanted to say that it's going to return a Boolean. and it's going to enforce me to return a Boolean. Because if I'm going to, you can see that right now it's going to say that the function is not returning what I declared. So if I will try to return, let's say, a 5, again, type number is not assignable to type Boolean. So it doesn't work. So it's actually like any object-oriented language that we know, and now it's going to compile. So taking this into the JavaScript, this is the JavaScript file that was created. You can see that we're using prototype, which is something quite old to support classes and object-oriented in JavaScript. But this is what I created. Okay, I wrote TypeScript, and I got this JavaScript. And when I'm going to run my browser, I'm going to actually execute JavaScript because Microsoft already did a mistake where they tried to enforce compiler to install something. Silverlight sound familiar? So they understood the mistake, and the browser doesn't need to know TypeScript because it's getting the actual JavaScript. So this is how we are starting to use TypeScript. So it's very simple. Download it, start to use it. So let's see what we want from our TypeScript. So first of all, we want the TypeScript to compile, and it does compile. Yeah, that's good. We've done that. The next thing we want to see what's actually object-oriented in TypeScript, what it gives us. Because it gives many things interesting. But let's see how they're implemented. So this is a list for me that what I think I need to have in order to have a good object-oriented solution. So of course I need a class, I need an interface and inheritance. I will need some access modifier. I will need public and private because without it I'm a bit in a problem. Actually, TypeScript already added protected, so we can use, which is kind of new. Interfaces, we're going to see interface today because interfaces are a bit different from what we expect, which is, it has its advantage and disadvantage, of course. Overriding method, having properties with setter and getter, and generics, which is the most important thing because without generics, we don't have lists, we don't have dictionary, we're going back to the old array, which is kind of sad to say. Another thing that we have in object-oriented, and in TypeScript, which is not related to object-oriented, but is extremely important, if I were to take your code and say you cannot use link anymore, would you be sad? Yeah, so we do have link in TypeScript. You can actually say the syntax of Lambda expressions. It's not related to object-oriented, but it's a great tool to have. So let's try a bit to use this object-oriented thing. So we are back to our object, data object, and I'm going to create a different class. So I'm going to create a couple of classes and creating inheritance between them and do a bit tricks like overriding things using interfaces. And after that we're going to have a nice data model that we can use. We're going to create a simple application to present it using knockout. So we'll see both the aspect of the object-oriented and both the aspect of Mvvm. So we want to have a class, and we are going to create a class called Animal. So this is the class, and let's say we have a public and we have a name, and this name is type of string. At the first time that I was writing it and I was learning TypeScript, the toughest part was to understand where I'm going to specify the type. Because, you know, we are regular to saying here string, but you'll get used to it. So I want to have a name for all my animals, so I'm going to create a constructor. And in my constructor, I want to get the name. So name and also string. And here I'm going to access the class name and assign it by the local name. Okay, so in constructor, as you know it, quite simple. And let's do some method. So what all the animal does, let's say all of them are sleeping. We want them to go to sleep. And we want to say how much time they are going to sleep. So it's going to be a number. And I want to specify whether they succeed to sleep or not. So I'm going to say Boolean and return true. So this is actually the constructor, the method, local member. This is not a property yet. Okay, we're going to see property later on. But a very important thing, do you use static singleton or static in your application? So static is very, very important. And you know, JavaScript does have kind of static. It has global thing in the application. And what do you think about global thing in your code? Yeah, that's scary. I was once working in consulting for a company actually using PHP. And PHP also can have global thing. And they want to, when transforming from page to page, they had this huge object that called data. And everybody just put something on the data and then grabbing it. And then they start having bugs that they don't understand how some number got into the database. Yeah, so we don't like it, but we do want static because we use static. Static is a good thing. Static allows us in our XAML to have a behavior and attach property towards a good thing. It's a good pattern to have. So we're going to create like, I want an ID for my animals. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a static, and let's say this is the ID counter, which is going to be a number. And I'm going to have a private member to have the ID of the current animal. And this is also going to be a number. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to access the static ID counter to increase it by 1. So I'm going to animal, and I'm going to say ID counter. As you can see, I'm not accessing to this. I'm accessing to animal because it is static. And now I can assign this dot ID to the ID counter, to the animal.id counter. So this is actually going to be that every time I am creating a new animal, I am creating the ID, assigning the ID and creating like a global ID for this. So let's create an instance for this. So var a equals new, and you can see that I have an instance for the app, which is my namespace. And immediately you can see that I have an animal. And now I'm going to pass, you can see that when I don't supply the constructor parameters, I'm not compiling, so let's create it number 1. And and you immediately see that it has sleep and name and everything you want. Okay, so let's create an inheritance. So I'm going to create 2 inheritance from animal. The first inheritance is going to be flying animal, and the second one is going to be water animal. So that I'm going to lead you to the situation where we have to use interfaces. So this is why we're taking this specific example. So let's create this inheritance. So again, we're doing an export. Export is simply public. If you're going to ask me why they call it export and not public, it's going to be tough to answer because I have no clue. But this is export, that's what it means. So I have a class, and let's call it water animal. And this is actually extends animal. And from now on, it is simply going to work, and everything that the animal has, the water animal has. If I would take this code and take it into C#, would that compile? If I would change this to public and extend, we're going to do the right syntax, would it compile?
Maybe not because of the code.
Mm-hmm. Exactly that. So when I'm overriding, when I'm inheriting from another class, I need to specify and explicitly say the constructor and call the base. So this is the first difference we can see, because I can create an instance of water animal with no problem, and it's actually inheriting the constructor. Okay, so it's actually saying, if you haven't specified, I'm going to take my base class. Of course, if I want, I can override it. So I'm going to do public, and it's, let's say, max diving, how long it can dive or something, and we have a number. And here, what I want to do is I want to create a constructor to get both of them. So I want to have the name, which is a string, and I want to have the max diving. Oops, let me make that capital. And also specify it's in a number. And now I need to call my base class with the name. So again, not base, but super, fine. Passing the name and saying this dot max diving equal to max diving. Okay, so this is the way I can do it. So what happens now is that this line doesn't compile, because I need to say both the name and the diving. Okay, so we're gonna have, let's say, a method so that we can override later. So this is going to be swim. And it gets no parameters, and it's actually a void. I can specify it's a void. And let's alert here that I am diving. Oops. Okay, so that's great. This is the water animal. And I'm going to real quick create the flying animal. And this flying animal is not going to have too many things special. It also extends the animal itself. And I'm going to do just one little method called fly. And fly gets the int and the height, great, int height, yeah. Height dot number, and it's returning, let's say any. Any actually means like an object. Yeah, you can pass anything you want. Great, wonderful. So this is the flying animal. So this is the difficult part of the talk. I'm going to create another object called duck. You all know the duck, right? So duck, should it inherit from water animal or flying animal? What? Both. So, you know, object-oriented, you cannot derive from, to inherit from both classes. And actually, when I was presenting this talk a couple of months before, somebody said, oh, Taps is going to let me do that. And fortunately, no. Actually, I don't think you want to inherit from both classes. It's going to be weird. So I'm going to say it's a water animal, and then we're going to have a problem with fly. How would you solve it? Interface, yeah. Okay, so let's create the duck. So the duck, you're going to say duck extends is a water animal. That's great, and we want it to have the fly method. So I'm going to copy it. And yeah, now we have, I want to have a method here which actually gets a flying object. This is what I want, and I want to call flying object dot fly, and we're going to say it's going to 100 meters. Okay, so now I want to, if I'm going to create, let's say, the flying animal, and it's going to be a new app dot flying animal, and it needs to get the name flying. So if I would call the fn function with flying, that would work because flying is, I have no constraint about this method. So I want to create a constraint because now I can, I can call fn with 7. Yeah, I can call everything with it because I didn't specify any type here. So I'm going to create an interface which is going to be interface, and this is going to be flyable. And we are going to have here fly, and we said that we want to have the height. Height. Actually, height is misspelled, right? No? Yeah, okay. So, this is how I specify interface. Interface, of course, can contain method and properties, anything you want. So now what I'm going to say, I want you to get the flying object if it implements the flyable. So we have two problems here that we need to fix. First of all, I need to say app.iflyable, and it still doesn't, oh, it does work. It shouldn't work. Okay, so it's saying that the module app doesn't export a member iflyable. So you can see that I didn't write here export. So let's export it, and now it should work. Great. So now I'm going to create an instance of a duck, and var duck new app.duck, and the duck needs to get the ducky duck. Okay, so why is that? Because I am inheriting from water animal, and the water animal should get the number. Okay, great. So now if I would call the fn with the duck object, it would work. And this is kind of interesting way to take a look about interfaces, because when we look at interfaces in .NET, we are specifying in each class that is actually going to say I am implementing the interface, and then I have to actually implement it. So here it's kind of different approach, because the approach is saying I don't want you to explicitly do it, but if you are going to be an object that should implement it, I'm going to check in the calling function. That means that if I'm going to do fn and set something which doesn't do that, let's do fn dot, we have the a, which is an animal. Let's write it with a. So the compiler is going to say that's not good. So it's actually taking the interface declaration and check it against every time you're going to assign something that should implement the interface. Okay, so it's a different approach. We need to get used to it, but it's a good approach, for my opinion. It's not a good approach. It does what we want us to be done. We can create an array of the interface. We can specify it in a method. Everything we want. We can return this type. So everything you want to do, you probably can do. So this is the most thing that we wanted to see from from the actual object-oriented. So I created here some demo code that you can take, and you can download the presentation and look at the code so you would remember. So the thing that I haven't talked about and I do want to talk about is when you want to override something. So actually when you want to override something, it's very simple. You don't have to do nothing, but be very precise about the same name. Okay, you can actually see that here I'm returning something, here I'm not returning something, and that would work. In .NET it wouldn't work. It's not an actual compiling, so it's a bit loosely. But what is critical is having the same name and getting the same parameters. Okay, that's what actually creating the override. So if I would create a duck instance and call fly, I would get I'm flying, and if I would create a flying animal, I would get this alert. Okay, so this is how you override. It's really, really simple. We don't have something like virtual versus abstract, which is kind of a shame. You generally don't have an abstract class, which is something that I think it's important to have. And I quite believe that TypeScript will create this. Remember that TypeScript is actually a product of Microsoft. Actually, the people who are developing C# are related to this project, so TypeScript probably going to get similar and similar mode to C#. So about properties, as it's pretty, yeah.
Just a question about the slide.
About what? This one?
Yeah, this one.
Mm-hmm.
How do you call the base method here?
Super.
Super.
Super.fly, and you get this one.
Okay.
Yeah. What, more question? No? Okay. So about properties, it's quite simple. You specify that this is a get of an age, and then you specify it's a number and the code you want to do, and set about the age. This is the value. It doesn't have to be value. We are regular from .NET to be value. You can call it any name you want, and then whatever logic you want to do, and do what you need to do with this setter. The next thing is generics. So we got these generics, and I think generics is a key ingredient for a successful application, because generics give us typing, and typing makes everything more clear for us. So you can use generics. It's very, very similar for what we have. You specify what types you're going to use. You can get it as a return type, as an parameter. You know, in C# you can say that a certain argument has to inherit from some interface. Yeah, you know this syntax? Okay, so so here I cannot do it, which is very, very a shame. The only thing I can say it's anything, or I can say it must to be an array. This is the two things that I can enforce. I guess that it's going to get better a long time. I certainly hope it's going to get better a long time. So this was about TypeScript. And TypeScript actually works with a lot of frameworks, because think of it, we got the C# itself, the let's say kind of C# itself. So we don't have the types to work with, because when you are working with C#, everything is written in C#. But if you take a look at, let's say, Jquery, you all familiar with Jquery? So Jquery is not implemented in TypeScript. But if I want it to be used by TypeScript, I would want to know what our declarations are. When the method, which parameter you're going to get. So this is a link, which became green lately somehow. And this link actually contains all the libraries that you're probably going to use, their type definition. The type definition is actually a file that's going to show you what the classes and what interfaces are available to you. So we're going to take a look at that so you would see how it looked. Hopefully the internet is going to be on our side today. Okay, so here you have all the frameworks that you can think of. You have Angular, and just name it and it's there. Of course, Knockout is there, the one that we're going to use very shortly. Knockout. So you can see that even Knockout, which is not so large, has a couple of definitions. And actually, we're going to look at definition and see how it looks like. So knockout.d.ts means the definitions of TypeScript. And looking at it, you can see that it has no implementation. It only has what you can use. So here's Knockout Observable Array, which is kind of familiar with a collection, not observable collection. So you can see here all the methods that are available for you. So when you are going to use it, you're going to take your Knockout, take TypeScript, and say, those are the types that are available for me. So then you can simply use, and you can say that if you want to slice the array, you need to say the start number and the end number. And of course, no implementation. And you can actually see that it uses generics here, so you would get the type that you sent. Okay, so this is a very important link for you. So when you come back home, you could take your type definition and start work with it. The presentation is going to be available for you, so you can have this link. And if you would write TypeScript type definition, this will be the first result in Google, so no problem to find it. Okay, so this is TypeScript and how it works with other frameworks. So we took TypeScript and made it compile. Yeah, so, and we made it to have object-oriented. Questions so far? No? Okay, so after we are absolute expert in TypeScript, now that we need to go and have understanding about the Mvvm aspect. So again, we are going to find ourselves a bit like frustrated with how we're going to implement it. And again, my friend is going to show you how he's being frustrated. So something isn't working. This time he came prepared, not just something to smash it with, but a saw. Yeah, so this is an actual commercial, not my friend, of course. If it was my friend, I wouldn't be his friend. So Mvvm. When we say Mvvm, we all know model, view model, but what we actually need to have in order to implement Mvvm. So data binding, that's the first thing. And data binding is all about having two-way notification that the UI can tell the view model something has changed, and the view model can say to the UI something has changed. And we want to support some kind of converters, which actually quite troubling thing in JavaScript and HTML. And we want to have command. Yeah, you click on a button, you want to execute some method. We're going to do that. This is actually so nice in JavaScript. It's much more easier. And of course, we need to have some context binding. Usually we are bound to the data context, but we can do binding to a certain element or to a static resource or something like that. So we want to have the ability to determine the context of the binding. So let's see how it actually gets done. So we're going to take our project and we're going to create some table presenting a list of animals, many types of animals. And this list is very security list, so we're going to have a login before that. So I'm going to add a view model, and I'm going to implement a view model. The first thing I'm going to implement in this view model, I'm going to implement some logic of login. And after we're going to have the login, we're going to create a table, and the table is going to present a list of animals. And that would be our demo. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually download Knockout. So again, npm is your new friend, and you're going to say that you want Knockout. That gets us Knockout. You can see Knockout has two files. You have a file for debug, and you have a file for JavaScript, for the production. The difference between them is that looks nice, that looks bad. Okay, so the idea behind it is it's actually thinking about performance. This is called a minified file. So when you are in production, you want the code to take less space and the size of the file to be as small as possible, whereas in debugging, we want it to be readable. Yeah. So we are going to create our view model. And we're going to call it animal view model. And this is actually a part of the app itself, so it's going to be in the model of the app. And this is the interesting thing, because when you're going to use between two files, even in C#, you want to say where it's from. So this is not actual compiling, so we're going to specify which file exactly. This is done by saying the reference. The path is to the data objects dot TypeScript. So by doing this, hopefully, yeah, by doing this, I actually created both to the view model to know the data object. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create the class, export class animal view model. And here we're going to create the logic for the login. So this is going to be a public, and I want to have the username. And what type should it be? The username. So it should be string, right? But when we create something that should be two-way binding, we need to implement in the setter the iNotify property change, right? So we don't have property here, and we don't have an actual interface to implement, so we need something else. So the type of this member is going to be actually Knockout. So the project doesn't know what Knockout is yet, because I download Knockout, and I download the JavaScript Knockout, and this is a TypeScript file. So I need something to get them together. I need the type definition of Knockout to be in my project, so both of them will work together. So what I'm going to do is actually go to the preferences of the project. And here in my libraries, I can say that I want to use the Knockout type definition. Okay? So this is going to add a file. This is going to add me a file. I'm going to drag it to here so it be easier for me. Yeah. Okay, so now I need to reference the file that I have added. This is going to be the reference to the path. No suggestions? Okay, so I want this file name So I'm going to take it because, come on, give me the file of the name of the file. Rename. No. Seriously, I need to write it now? There is copy pass? Oh, nice, thank you. So let's see that it's the right path. Oh. Okay, so I need to take the definition so my project will get them to know each other. So now, if I'm going to write knockout, I'm going to get all the types definition of knockout. This is actual how TypeScript and any other libraries, in this case knockout library, get them together. So now when I'm going to work with knockout, it's going to be with the typings. So knockout, and I want to use knockout observable. Knockout observable simply means that I observe any kind of change. And I want it to be a type of string. And knockout.observable, this is creating the actual instance of observing something. And the initial value going to be something that is empty. I'm going to also create a password. And again, knockout observable, also of type string, and knockout observable, an empty string. And the next thing I want to have a boolean saying whether I have or don't have a login, user login. So public has user. Let's copy it. This is going to be boolean, and this is going to be false. Now I want to create something that's going to actually execute the logic of logging in. We use when we are going to execute it using command. So we are used to deriving from iCommand or using relay command, any kind of this solution. So here it's far more simple. I'm going to say login, and that's about it. That's all I need to do in order to use this method from the view. And I'm going to do the logic of this. So I want the username. So this is a kind of the thing that is very tricky. I want the username to be Michael, and I want the password to be equal to, let's say, 1, 2, 3. So this actually is not going to work because there is something very not correct here. This is the knockout observable. I don't want to check the two between a string and the knockout observable. I want the value of the knockout observable. So if I want to get the value, simply call it as a method. That is going to return the value. And if that's true, what I want to do is I want to go to the has user and send a value with true. So this is what you need to do to work with those properties and have something called from the UI. I did a stuff, I told you a couple months ago, and someone told me that this is not good, this is not safe, it's security-wise, the password is written here. So I told them, yeah, Knockout has so much problem with security, and everybody was laughing at this a joke. And afterwards, he came to me and told me, listen, if it has so many security problems, why are you showing this to us? And I said to him, you know, I was kidding, and he was so so upset. So this is the view model that we need to have. So now we're going to actually create the UI itself. So this is going to be HTML and an index HTML. So I'm going to add all the references I need to download the script. The first thing I'm going to need is Knockout itself. So I'm going to grab Knockout, Knockout, and the build, and the output, and I'm going to take the JavaScript, the Debug Javascript. And any of you spent a lot of time on this bug here? Like a huge time? No? Okay, this actually is completely wrong. And it's very annoying because what I need to do to fix this is that one. You cannot create a script tag without the actual closing. Why? This is the standard, and this is what you need to do. So actually, it depends on which browser you are running it in, but most browsers are going to be that they are not going to load the rest of the scripts, and you are going to be very upset why it's not loading. So remember to close it. So now I want to load the rest of the script that I need to use. Those are the scripts that I created. So I want to create to use the script of data object. Do I need to use the TypeScript file or the JavaScript file? The JavaScript file, okay? This is what the browser is going to execute. It doesn't know what TypeScript is. So I need to use the JavaScript file. And the last thing I need to do is to create a script with a source for the animal view model. So this is all the scripts I need to run my code. And now I'm going to create the logic itself. So I'm creating a div, it's like a container. And I want to say this is the login and break a line. And then I want the username. And an input is the thing that gets me to input things. It's type of text. And now I want to bind the data from the input to the view model. And this is the thing that we are used to saying text equals binding and some property name. So it's a bit different. We are going to say this is a data binding, data bind, data bind. And now we're going to say the value, we want to take the value, okay? So this is the property we are looking at in the UI, and we want to assign it to the property in the view model. This is the username. And again, we want to do it for the password. And it's going to be an input, type, password, and have data binding, again, the value to password. Okay, and the last thing we want to do is we want to create an actual button to click in order to log in. So this is going to be, again, an input, type, button, and again, data bind. Now I don't want the value because there is no value input. I want to do, upon click, go to login. So that's all I need to do. This is actually going to call my function. Yeah.
Where did you specify which is the view model?
What do I?
Where did you specify which
Ah,
one is the view model?
great question. So I haven't done it yet. I will do it in a second. So just so we can test this, I want to do an alert and say login.
Just to note you forgot a slash at the one of the passwords. Second.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so this is the moment where I need to actually bind it. Because in WPF, we would go and say the data context is some data context. Here I need to create the binding itself. So I'm going to save you some time on some known issue in Knockout. The actual applying of the binding has to be done after the page was loaded. So either use Jquery and the event of document ready, or you can simply do this trick of creating a script, which is a text JavaScript. And I'm going to create a self-executing method. And here what I'm going to do, I'm going to create var, the view model, new app.animal view model, and going to knockout ko dot apply bindings for the view model. So this is actually like setting the data context. I tell knockout, every bindings you are going to create are going to be looked at the view model. Of course, we can have nested setting of apply bindings, and we're going to see an example of that in a few moments. So let's see if what I've told you is true or doesn't work at all. So we are going to run this one, and let's say Michael 123, click and login. Okay, that means that we had two-way binding here because the view model actually got the data from the view here to see if the credential was correct. And here we specify, we didn't see how the UI is affected. We are going to do it shortly. And login was called and we alerted it. So I'm going to delete the alert and create some UI to show that you actually logged in. So what I want to do now is that whenever I logged in, after the login, I don't want to see the login part anymore. I want it to disappear because I was already logged in and I want to welcome my user. So I'm going to create here another div, and this div is going to handle the scenario where the user already logged in. So we're going to say welcome to span. It's used for a text. And we're going to do data binding, text, and the username. So actually what is going to happen now is that I will see both the logic of the UI of the login and the welcome message. And I don't want it. I want it to be, I want to use the has user to determine which one to show. So I'm going to do something like this. On the div itself, I'm going to say if not, if I don't have a user, show that one. If I do have a user, data bind if has user. If I do have a user, that means that I don't need to show the login and I can show the welcome message. So now I'm going to log in and the login will disappear and I get the welcome message. So this is how we actually can perform two-way bindings, and because now we saw that the view model has notified the UI and we saw the effect in the UI, and we actually saw how to bind something using commanding. So the next thing I want to do now is I want to create an array of animals and present it in a table. So this is actually going to be very nice because we already have types of animal. We are going to use the actual types. And creating an array is quite simple. Public, let's make it larger. Okay, so we have animals and knockout. And this time we want an observable array. So that means it's like an observable collection. And this is going to be of type app.animals. And we are going to initialize the observer with an empty array. So this is actually a very nice thing. Get compiled. You are going to be, oh, I create observable, but I need to do an observable array. Now we're happy? Great. So this is the point where we're actually taking knockout and TypeScript and use them together. Because as you can see, the array is actually of the real type of animals. And this is something quite new in HTML and JavaScript because otherwise we couldn't done this. So I'm going to create a constructor just to initialize the animal. So these animals push means add in this case. And I'm going to create a new app. This is going to be a regular animal. And you can see that we have IntelliSense to see what I need to path here. So this is I am an animal. And I'm going to copy it a couple of times. So this is going to be flying animal, and this is going to be water animal, and this is going to be a duck. So here I needed to pass also an int, and let's see if the compiler likes it. Oh, this is also an int. So I think the compile, oh, now it's compiled. So I created the array itself, and now I need to create in the UI how to actually iterate on the collection and present it. So in XAML we had this data template that we could specify how to take each data item and how to present it, how to create the view for it. So we're going to have exactly the same. We're going to have here, let's break a line. And we're going to have here a table. And table, we're going to create the first row. It's going to be the header row. And we're going to say this is the name. And I want to have another cell. This is actually every column that I'm creating. And I want to create an action, what I can do with this animal. So now I'm saying that what is the body of the table itself, because we had the header, and the body itself is going to be populated from the array itself. So data bind, and we're saying for each, and the for each is for animals. So this is actually how I'm saying that I want to have a panel like item source or anything like that, showing a couple of things. So creating a line for each animal and saying that I want to present the name because it's the first column. So this is a span because it is a text, which is bound to text. And this is where I can actually bound directly to the current animal. So all I need to do is say the name. Now, this is actually means that every time I will be in this part of the UI, I am getting the current item that I am iterating on. As you were in WPF, having each data template getting only the item itself, the same applies to here. This is the kind of thing that are actually really nice because we don't need to learn another pattern, another idea, because it's actually exactly the same. And we actually want to do something else, as the action itself. So another TD with an input type of button, and I want to do a data binding for click. And in the click, I want to delete the animal from the list. And let's give it a value, so we'll see the name, delete. Okay, so now if I would run this, run, and let's log in. So something isn't working good, and we need to understand why. So this is actually how we can debug things. And let's take a look on the error. So it's actually saying that data animal is not defined. And that's fine. Let's define it. So I want to have in my view model something that is actually going to delete the animal itself. So public delete animal, and deleting the animal is a function. We don't need the public. So delete animal, I wanted to get the item of the animal. Let's go to this dot animal and remove with the item itself. So what do you think? It's a good solution? Yeah? Okay, let's see. I can write public or not. Yeah, let's do it public. So let's see if we are right. Fortunately, I believe it's not going to work because it's still not defined. And the reason it's not defined, this is bound to each animal itself. You see, the name works, but the delete animal is not, because the name is part of the data object, is part of the animal. And the delete is part of the view model, which is fine. This is how it's supposed to work, but I need to find the way to tell knockout, go to the right place. So I'm going to the index HTML, and I'm going to say something really nice. I'm going to say, go to my parent and delete it. So this is quite nice. I can easily do that. But that is almost the right solution. We still have some problem with it. So let's run it and see if something has changed. It's actually, I don't need to pass the param because it does it for me. But let's see what really does happen. So I do see all the elements, which is good, and I don't have errors. But when I will try to delete one, I would get an error because it's saying that I can read the property remove. That's weird because it has remove. So what I can do, I can actually debug it and go to the animal view model and put a breakpoint and click on it. And actually I did get the item. You see the item is the animal itself, which is kind of nice because knockout simply provide you with the current item because, let's face it, you probably want to have it. So here it is. So it looks like it's supposed to work, but the error is saying it doesn't know what is removed. So something actually means that is wrong with the animal. So when I'm looking at this is flying animal. Now we are all intelligent people. How could it be? Because I'm in the view model. So in JavaScript actually something really interesting. This doesn't mean the current object. In .NET when you're saying this, you mean to the current object in the current place in the memory. This in JavaScript means the current context. And the context this has been executed from is the animal itself. So, yeah, the look that, what? This is how it works, this is how it is. So we need to find a way to override this because we are not going to get the animal anytime soon in this way. So the way we are going to solve this is actually we are going to leverage TypeScript because TypeScript allows me to do something quite nice. I'm going to delete part of this, and I'm going to say this is actually a delegate where I get an item, and I'm returning a void. This is the way to say this is a delegate. And now I'm going to implement the delegate. I'm going to say this dot delete animal, delete the animal, is equal to item with the implementation of this dot animal dot remove and the item. So now when I'm going to be in this, it was executed from the delegate which was defined in the class. So the context is always going to be the context of this instance. This is something that is harder to implement in JavaScript, but it's really, really nice and convenient in JavaScript. So now when I'm going to run this one, and Michael 123 login, and I'm going to delete this. I'm actually able to delete it. Okay, so this is actually a couple of tips that could save you some time. You know, the script thing to close it, and saying the applying the JavaScript in the bottom. And remember always to you're thinking as a .NET developer, but it's not always applying to here. So this is not actually this. It could be also other things that in the application. So I also added here couple of slides that actually saying everything we've seen, how to set the data context and how to bind an element, how to play with the visibility, something that I haven't shown you that's quite nice. You can actually say, you see this kind of thing, you have to set the visibility and actually say some kind of if statement. You can actually say it in the UI itself. This is part of the HTML. So you can actually play with the logic in the HTML itself, which is kind of nice because it saves you some time, but you need to remember that the logic should be in the view model, so you need to be careful with that. About commands and collections, and yeah. So about what we said about the context binding, we said that the context binding is could be related to the parent as we see it in our example. We can actually specify an indexer and go to the parent and the grandparent and as far as we want. We can get the root, which the root itself, the first item, the topmost view model. And another element, if you want to just say the name and get the name, and you can use it, so you can actually be bound to any element you want. So we took the knockout and actually implemented Mvvm, and it's quite similar to what you know. And TypeScript is quite similar to what you know. So you have the base start to actually be familiar with when you're doing your first project. So what I think to do, you need to do is actually go home and start using it, because you do have experience with object-oriented and you do have experience with Mvvm, and you can do it in the web environment. Do remember that there are other frameworks. Knockout is the most convenient for us because we know Mvvm, but there are other frameworks that do give you some kind of Mvvm, some better, some worse, but after you're getting comfortable in the web environment, take a look at the other things. You know, Angular is so popular now, so it might be a good choice to look at. The thing is that they all work with TypeScript. All of them have the type definition for TypeScript. So you simply, what you saw in Knockout, you can do working it with Knockout, with TypeScript. And you remember the 3 dogs in the beginning that was like scared? So now we have a dog that smiles and we can go ahead and do it. Any questions? Feel free to ask. Opposed to the dog, I'm not biting. Okay, so thank you very much. And if you have any question, just send me an email, Twitter, anything. And good luck with the web. Thank you.